All right, Steeler fans, it is time for the Monday morning conversation, and I've decided to try and dive into some of Fans First Sports Network's college feeds, especially in the case of the Steelers draft picks. Well, let's start with none other than the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I bring in Justin Golba. He covers Ohio State for Fans First. What's up, Justin? How are you?
Good, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. And before we hit record, I was talking with you. We were laughing because I said, there's probably a lot of our listeners and people that follow our network here at the Steel Curtain Network. And they say, well, Jeff, like, why wouldn't you bring on Sean Gurley or Kevin Tate or even Jeremy Betts? And why don't you have them? They're big Ohio State fans. Because I feel like, well, they're Steeler fans too. And when you're talking about a Steeler fan and their favorite college team gets two of their players drafted to the Steelers, they're just automatically going to think great things are going to happen. So I asked Justin, are you a Steeler fan? Because I wanted that stripped away. And Justin, who are you a fan of?
I'm a Cleveland Browns fan.
And I said, that's perfect. That's perfect. If anyone's going to give us a realistic take
Yeah.
on these players, it's going to be a Browns fan. Being an Ohio State Buckeye fan, let me ask you this first. What's it like seeing a Buckeye go to the Steelers?
It happens too often. It's hard to watch, especially these two Buckeyes, because even though Will Howard was only there for a year, he's in the lores of Ohio State history forever. And Jack Sawyer ended up being one of the, I think, all-time just most liked Ohio State players. So seeing them both go, I was watching. You can always tell when you're watching the draft when something bad's about to happen, and you're like, you can see it start to unfold, and you're like, yeah, they're definitely both going to the Steelers. So, but they got two great ones for sure.
All right, so I want to start with Jack Sawyer because he was the long tenured Buckeye. He grew up in the area. He just was Ohio State through and through. I mean, I don't know if you got to see him on Ben Roethlisberger's podcast. It was a really great podcast, and he talked about a lot about Ohio State. Now that's the only place he ever wanted to play. I don't know. Describe him like for someone that's never seen him play a snap of college football, which I know that's difficult for some to fathom, considering they won a national title last year. How would you describe Jack Sawyer to a layman who has no idea what the Steelers just got?
He's got an incredibly high motor. I mean, he plays every down like it's his last. Like you said, he was a Buckeye through and through. Just grew up 20 minutes from Columbus, was a 5-star recruit. He was part of a huge recruiting class too of Donovan Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, one of the better recruiting classes in Ohio State history, and he was the lead of it. He was the edge rusher that when you look back at Ohio State history, obviously the Bosa's, Chase Young, he was supposed to be kind of that next guy. Unfortunately, he didn't really pan out to that kind of level. Obviously, that level is hard to hold anybody to, but
right.
That's kind of the bar that has been set. And then, for a while, it was just everyone was kind of waiting for him to break out and have that kind of become kind of. He was always good, but it was never the hype that he was. He was kind of a victim of his own hype, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So, and then in general, he, the Missouri game, his 2 years ago in the Cotton Bowl, when they played Missouri in the bowl game, he had 3 sacks, and that was when people were like, okay, maybe this is him kind of coming into his own. And then he kind of led the Ohio State guys all coming back that senior class because they never beat Michigan. Now, we'll fast forward a year into that, but they kind of came back because they never beat Michigan. They didn't accomplish what they wanted to do. So guys like Denzel Burke, Travion Henderson, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuilamuau, all those guys, they all came back because they all would have got drafted in 2020. Would that have been 4? Yeah, 2025. Yeah. The years at this point. But they all would have been drafted, but they all came back. They all had one goal in mind, and it was beat Michigan, win a national title. Obviously, they did the harder one of that, but he was kind of the leading force behind that. So I think Buckeye fans really rallied around him because he was the one that was like, look, we're just not done here. We've accomplished a lot of individual goals, but as a team, we haven't done what we want to do. And that was where I think a lot of Buckeye fans really, like I said, just kind of rallied around him and were excited to see kind of what he was able to do. And then his senior year was when he really, I think, broke out and was kind of the edge rusher I think we kind of wanted to see his whole time.
So, yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up there, and that was, you talked about his development, and obviously Ohio State is known for having some very good pass rushers. You named them, the Bosa brothers, Chase Young. If that's the top tier, those 3 players, did Jack Sawyer ever reach that echelon, or is he maybe the tier below it? What's your take on that?
He's probably the tier below it in like a world of like a Zach Harrison, who plays for the Falcons now. But a guy like Zach Harrison was a guy that I think he's excelled in the league. So, maybe
Yeah.
Jack Sawyer is one of those guys that also can do that. There's been a couple Ohio State guys that have done that. Jonathan Cooper is one with the Broncos where he was great at Ohio State, but he's taking that bigger step in the NFL. So, I don't think he reached that Chase Young Bosa level, but I mean, who does?
Not many people
That's a
do.
heck
That's
of a
right.
level. Yeah.
That
So
is.
that was something that I think really kind of hurt him in just in terms of fans' eyes early on because we were, that's what we got used to seeing. It was the Bosas, then it was Chase Young, and it was just back to back to back, all of these incredible edge rushers. And he was good, but obviously that level is tough to get to.
My next question with Sawyer is he a player? I mean, it seems like when you listen to him talk, he seems like a sponge. And is he seem like a coachable guy? Because if he is, he's going to have one hell of a mentor in TJ Watt that's going to help him learn some of the tricks of the trade. And I know that the knock on Jack Sawyer is that he can be a little stiff and that he doesn't have the best hand technique. He's more of a, I'm just going to bruise my way to the quarterback. And sometimes that works, but in the league, you got to have some moves. Does he seem like a guy that's able to learn and to adjust and to adapt, even if it is in the National Football League?
I wouldn't be surprised if he moved in with TJ Watt into his house and just copied every single thing. He is like that. He is a guy that you can tell he just sponges up information. I think that's a great way of wording it as a sponge. And we'll get to him, but Will Howard is the same way. Both those guys are guys that, even two different guys. Obviously, Will Howard wasn't the star recruit, but they're two guys that you can tell just they listen to people, they sponge up that kind of information, and you can see that even Jack Sawyer throughout his time at Ohio State was able to kind of gain some of those NFL skills and whatnot. And like you said, he's never been the most technical edge rusher, but I think learning about TJ Watt is just going to be phenomenal for him. So I'm excited to see kind of what his first to second year jump is, if that makes sense, of once he gets kind of comfortable as a Steeler. And then, because your rookie offseason, there's so much you're learning, there's so much you're adapting to. That first to second year when you've already been in the league, you kind of understand it. Now it's just about football. I'm curious. That jump, I'm very interested to see.
Yeah, I mean, Steeler fans are probably, if you're smart as a Steeler fan, you know that the special teams is going to be his way to get on the field the most as a rookie. And then obviously he'll probably spell TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith from time to time. I do want to have a couple more questions about him before we move on to Will Howard. Did he suffer any injuries last season that were significant or to the point where Steeler fans might say, is this thing lingering? Obviously, he fell a little bit in the draft. A lot of people thought he'd be a day 2 pick, and he falls to round 4. Didn't know if there was an injury history with him. What do you have for that?
I don't think so. No, he pretty much played every game. I think one of the issues, not an issue, but Ohio State just has so much depth at that position that they rotate a lot. So I think maybe guys took that as somewhat of maybe a energy thing or maybe a stamina thing, but I never saw it. If he was out there, he was full go.
All right, last question about Sawyer. The Michigan flag being planted in the middle of the field at Ohio State, was it him that ripped the flag away, or was it someone else? Because I heard someone say it was Sawyer, and I just haven't gone back to look. Is it him?
Yeah, that was Sawyer. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, that'll play well in the AFC North, man. They've got some tough rivalries.
That's the thing. Look, it's one of those things where I understand, it became a big topic, obviously, and Michigan fans made fun of him. But if you're an Ohio State fan, that's how I want you to react. I don't want you to plant the flag on my field. I want someone to go out there and grab it. I want someone to fight back. So that's who he is. He's a fighter. He's very proud of being a Buckeye, and he's gonna have that same passion with the Steelers.
All right, let's go to Will Howard. Now, this is different, and you mentioned this at the top of the segment when you said, Will Howard was only there for 1 year. I want to ask you what your thoughts were when Ohio State announces that they got Will Howard, this kid from Kansas State, to come in and be the quarterback for 2024. What was your take just initially, kind of like your knee-jerk reaction when you found that out? Were you excited? Were you kind of like, I don't know about this? What was your take?
I was actually excited. A good friend of mine is a Kansas State alum, so I oddly watched a lot of Kansas State games over the past couple of years. And the one thing that I know from Will Howard was he was just very resilient. He wasn't mistake-free. He'd make mistakes, but it never seemed to affect him moving forward. He was always just kind of a next play kind of guy. And I remember, I believe it was 2023, they played Texas, and he had like 5 touchdowns. They lost in overtime, but it was in Texas. And it was a game where you could tell like the atmosphere didn't affect him. You know, it was Kansas State at Texas. A lot of times that can just be two bright lights. That it didn't matter to him. He was just there. He played one of his best games of the season. So that was where I was like, if we can get that Will Howard, we'll win a national championship. And for the most part, that's what we got.
So you did say that he is known to make mistakes, and but he will overcome them. But I'm not going to say mistake prone. I think that's a bad label to put on a quarterback.
Yeah.
Is there a mistake that he makes more than others? For instance, is it like trying to throw it over the middle? Does he struggle with certain patterns? Did you see anything like that last season? You would say that that's the mistake that he commonly makes.
So I think early on, obviously there's, if you watch any college football, there's a guy named Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. And I think a little bit early on maybe he got a little too locked on to JJ sometimes, and that forced a couple of just turnovers or interceptions. But other than that, it was funny. Early on this season, he didn't make that many mistakes, but the mistakes he made were just ginormous. Like against Penn State, he only made 2 mistakes the entire game, but it was a pick 6, and he fumbled the ball in the end zone, which led to turnover. So
right.
It was things like that. But again, it was never things that never against Oregon. Obviously, the slide down, not knowing the time. So, but that was things that he always recovered from. He never made that mistake again. And you could tell that every mistake he made, he learned from, which was something that was huge moving forward, because obviously with the playoff this year, you're playing 4 playoff games. You're going to have that resiliency because you're not going to be perfect. And in the playoff, he damn near was. But that was something that I noticed early on was if he made a mistake, he wasn't going to make it again. And that kind of puts into your earlier point of just learning and sponging up information.
So outside of the occasional turnover, what are some of his other weaknesses, we'll put it that way, in his game entering the NFL, in your opinion?
I think a couple times, this is a small thing, but I think there were some times where when they were in the read option, he would try to take the ball himself too many times and not hit, obviously when you have Trayvon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, if they can get the ball, you kind of want them to have the ball. There was a couple times he'd pull it, and maybe that wasn't the best decision. So maybe just reading the defense in that regard. But other than that, he's a veteran quarterback. He has that experience. I think that he really learned from his Kansas State time of just being able to, like I said, just not make the mistakes. You're going to make them, but learn from them and move on. And I think that was something that was very impressive with him, was just his resiliency and not keeping those things in the back of your head, just moving forward from errors.
Does he have the arm strength, in your opinion? Throw the deep ball, throw all the throws? Because a lot of people kind of knocked his arm strength coming into the combine. Obviously, he had a horrible combine. Don't want to get into that. But still, what about his arm strength? Do you think it's good enough?
I do. I mean, I saw PFF. I think he was graded 6th this year in the NCAA in deep balls. Now, a lot of that does play, or like accuracy in deep balls. I think he was over 50% in balls 25 yards or deep or greater. That does play into having JJ Smith and Carnell Tate and Emeka Egbuka just going up and getting those balls. But for the most part, I thought his arm strength was good. The Tennessee game, if you really kind of want to look, it doesn't showcase his arm strength that much, but he makes a couple pretty strong NFL throws in that game, especially to JJ Smith. That's kind of a good example of when he's locked in, of the kind of throws he can make.
All right, now the strengths, you talked about his resiliency. What other strengths would you have? I think I've watched some of his film. I try to just let it play out as a professional, because it can be totally different, but sneaky athletic,
Yeah.
a lot of people have compared him to, he's the same size and stature of Ben Roethlisberger, 6'4", about 240 some pounds. Ben was sneaky athletic as well. Some have said Josh Allen. I don't know if that conveys, so to speak, but
Josh Allen's probably best case scenario. Yeah.
If it's another Ben Roethlisberger, Steeler fans would be just fine with it.
Yeah.
What are some of his other strengths? And this can be both tangible and intangible.
Yeah, he's, like you said, he is sneaky athletic. He didn't showcase it as much at Ohio State, I think, as people wanted to. Kansas State, he had a couple like 80, 85-yard touchdown runs he was able to break. But even in the Notre Dame game, in the championship game, he had a huge run that I think kind of got people off guard. So he is very sneaky athletic. He's very good in the 10 to 25 yard range of throwing the football. I think he was the most accurate passer in the country from that range this year. And that was really helpful when you do have guys like J.J. Smith and Emeka Egbuka just running towards the middle of the field. He's not going to miss those throws. So I'm not even positive who the Steelers receivers are this year. I know it's been changing a lot. I know DK obviously, but
DK, Roman Wilson's expected in year 2 to have a big step forward. Obviously,
that could be a very interesting combo, Will Howard and Roman Wilson, because obviously as an Ohio State fan, I've watched a lot of Roman Wilson.
Yeah.
And that could be an interesting dynamic with those two, because like I said, Will Howard is really good from the 10 to 25, the mid-range. His deep ball wasn't as good, but that 10 to 25 mid-range passing is where he excelled this year. And like I said, just his mindset. I mean, he's a guy that he has a ton of confidence. He truly believes he's probably the best quarterback, like on the field or however you want to word it. It was one of those things where it was easy for fans to make fun of when he struggled, like against Michigan, because the week before that was the Indiana game where he like threw the cigarette on the ground and stomped on it like a joke about Coach Signetti, things like that. But he is outwardly confident, and he's gonna show that. So it's a good thing to have as a quarterback.
Now, you bring up the leadership. I've always said, there's people that are outward leaders, but that doesn't mean people are following. Is he a guy that the team rallies around? Do they seem to like him? Is he that type of leader, or is he more of a rah guy? But in the meantime, everyone's just kind of like, "Damn, Will, would you shut up?" Like, what's the takeaway from the rest of the team?
Yeah, 100% they rally around him. And it was interesting because, like I said, there was a core group of guys that came back to this team of guys that have been Buckeyes for 4 or 5 years. And I was curious how they were going to have to follow somebody new, no matter who the quarterback was, whether they did go with Julian Sayin or Devin Brown or it was Will Howard. And I was curious to see how a newcomer would fit into that group, because it was always going to be a newcomer quarterback this year when Kyle McCord transferred out. So and it seemed like the team rallied around him immediately. A funny kind of combination is Jack Sawyer was someone that rallied around him immediately. And that was, I think, helped the rest of the team rally around him, because Jack Sawyer he's the vocal outward leader as well. He's been that for the past 3 or 4 years. So the fact they're both going to Pittsburgh is pretty funny. But I think that really helped. And he's an easy guy to rally around, because he lives as he breathes, if that makes sense. Like he does what he says. He's been, like I said, he wasn't the top recruit. He went through some trials at Kansas State. He started early. He was even kind of in the same boat at Kansas State that he was in Ohio State, where, they had Avery Johnson behind him, which I think was the highest rated recruit or quarterback in their program history. So there was always somebody kind of nipping at his heels. Avery Johnson got to play a little bit behind him. So even this year with Julian Sayin, the star freshman, people were kind of, I would definitely say there were a contingent of Ohio State fans that were just kind of waiting for Howard to make a mistake because they wanted to see Julian Sayin. And he never gave Ryan Day the option to not play him, because he played so well throughout the year.
I want to go back to a player that left before Will Howard came in, and that's Kyle McCord. And it's interesting because these two are kind of connected in a way. Kyle McCord leaves, he goes to Syracuse. Will Howard comes in. Kyle McCord gets drafted 1 pick before he does in Philadelphia. What went wrong with Kyle McCord at Ohio State that Will Howard was able to capitalize on when he was there and win a national title?
I think it's the mindset thing. I think that's what a lot of Ohio State fans will tell you. It was just, it never felt like Kyle McCord was kind of that outward leader. There were some times it looked like it, but and that's not a bad thing. Not everybody's like that. Like you said, some people lead from within. Some people are there's different kinds of leaders, but it never felt like he was that vocal leader that sometimes you want to see a quarterback. And Will Howard was. And to be fair to Kyle McCord, he was very good as Ohio State's quarterback. It is just a different kind of bright lights, constant criticism. I mean, truly fair, constant criticism, even when you play well, people want you to play better. There's things like that. So I think Kyle McCord found a great home in Syracuse, because it was a little bit, he could just kind of be himself. He could just, nobody threw the ball more than he did this year, truly.
Yep.
Maybe nobody in the history of college football threw the ball more than he did this year. So they leaned into him, and he found a great home. And, I think it was kind of a win-win, because we were able to bring in Will Howard that I think, I don't know that Kyle McCord would have really, they both lost to Michigan. It would have been interesting to see Kyle McCord in the same spot that Will Howard was in after losing to Michigan. Kyle McCord just hit the transfer portal and didn't play again as Ohio State quarterback. But Will Howard had to go play in a playoff, and kind of put that behind him and say, okay, that's over. Obviously, it was bad, worst loss in a long time, but we still have a national title to play for. And I would have been interested to see Kyle McCord in those same shoes. I'm not sure that he would have bounced back as well.
All right, so last question about Will Howard. What are some reasonable expectations for Steeler fans that maybe didn't follow Ohio State and Will Howard's career there, even though on only 1 year? What are some expectations for him coming into the pro game and with the Steelers?
Well, I guess I have a question for you to answer that. Is he going to be the day one starter? Is Aaron Rodgers coming? What is the Steelers?
Well, I think that here's let's assume the two scenarios. If Aaron Rodgers comes in, you'd have Aaron Rodgers 1, Mason Rudolph 2, Will Howard likely 3. The best case scenario for Will Howard is that Aaron Rodgers doesn't come in. Mason Rudolph starts. He's QB2. Mason Rudolph struggles. The Steelers probably say, let's see what this kid can do. And he actually gets some reps. If Aaron Rodgers comes in, I don't know if Will Howard plays at all this year, unless something really goes bad. If he doesn't come in, then I think there's a chance that we do see Will Howard. But in terms of just expectations of a player, like here's what you're getting. Like give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think he's going to be, like I said, he's going to sponge up. A good guy like Mason Rudolph's a good guy for him to learn from because he has bounced around a little bit. He's a good quarterback, but they were probably pretty similar quarterbacks at, when Mason Rudolph was at Oklahoma State. I know obviously had Justin Blackman there. So, Will Howard had J.J. Smith, kind of both generational college football players. So there's some similarities there. I think, again, if he does get some playing time, I think he will make some mistakes. He's going to, learn from him. He's a rookie, but I don't think you'll see him make the same mistake twice. I've said that a couple of times. And I think that you're going to get a guy that he's going to come in with the confidence that he's QB1, even if he's not. And he's always going to be, he's going to be ready to go when his number's called. And I think that's going to be an important thing for any rookie quarterback. Just, be ready. The whole be ready, so you don't have to get ready kind of thing. I think he's going to be very well prepped. He's going to be a playbook guy. He's going to be a film guy. He's going to do all the little things that I think rookies need to do to excel. And then it's just going to come down to, at the end of the day, his pure talent. Which he's not the most talented quarterback. He's not the most talented quarterback in this draft, but he is a guy that he will sponge up all that information and he'll use that and then kind of help feed that into his talent. And he is a very accurate quarterback. So I think that'll play well with guys like Roman Wilson, obviously DK Metcalf. I think one of his best friends will probably be Pat Freiermuth. So that'll be an interesting composition. That's the one thing he didn't have at Ohio State. We didn't have like a big, strong tight end to rely on. Cade Stover graduated last year and Max Clare is only coming in this year. So that'll be an interesting combination of him and kind of a tight end that, one of the better ones in the NFL at top 6. So that'll be interesting to see with him.
Well, it sure seems like the Steelers, if worst case scenario, they got 2 really good leaders. They got 2 really good leaders 100%. And they got 2 good locker room guys. They're not going to give you headaches. They're not going to have off the field drama. They're going to be team first guys. And that's exciting. And I'm sure you're excited to, as a Browns fan, to watch them continue their careers with the black and gold.
Yeah, unfortunately I have to follow him now because, follow him. I gotta, it's one of those things where I root for their success. Obviously I don't root for the team's success, but I'll root for their success.
I get it.
You're 100% right. They were the 2 leaders of this Ohio State team. And this is a team that bounced back from probably 3 different big spells of adversity. So whenever you can have guys like that rally the team, you're definitely getting something pretty special. And I'm excited to see what they do.
Well, I thank you for your time, Justin. I'm going to give you an opportunity to plug social media handles as well as what you're doing for Fans First Sports Network. So go ahead and do that now.
Yeah. Justin_Golba is my personal Twitter. I host Hangout in the Holy Land for Land-Grant Holy Land and Fan First. And then also Bucketheads podcast, which is an Ohio State basketball podcast. But that is Bucketheads LGPN for Fans First as well. So you can check me out anywhere there.
Thank you for your time, man. Good luck with the Buckeyes this season. And I'm sure I'll let you know if maybe Will Howard or Jack Sawyer make a big play against the Browns.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll see it.
All right. Take it easy. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks.